Hey, everybody. Welcome back to your Full Crew podcast. I'm Dawn Zolda, one of your co hosts.
And I'm Mike Peel, your other co host. I want to thank our sponsors, Aerovigilance, Rupert Law, Drone Up, and SAIC for making this show possible. We've got some great articles coming up today. We're going to be talking about AI making it to the Hill, specifically both the Senate hearing and the White House releasing an AI framework. The initial stages of that. We're also going to be talking about one of our favorite topics, air taxi noise. And we're also going to be talking about some important legal considerations regarding counter UAS. And we've got some great guests to discuss these topics today. I'm going to start with Dave Krause. So, Dave, tell us a little bit about yourself. And I think this is your second time on the show, right?
Yes, it is. Hi, everyone. My name is Dave Krause. I co-own a company called Influential Drones. We're one of the industry members with the FAA safety team. Pleasure to be here a second time.
Yep, happy to have you again. We also got Jason Pritchard. So I'm going to call this his 1.5 appearance because he almost made it on a couple of months ago. So we're happy to have Jason back to finally share his opinions. So Jason, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Mike. Yeah, great to be here as well. My name is Jason Pritchard. I'm the executive editor of eVTOL Insights. So we're one of the leading news sources covering the advanced air mobility market across the globe. We do daily news, videos, podcasts, conferences, of which it was great to have you with us, Mike, as well. So great to be here.
Yeah, and that was an awesome show to be at in terms of getting the right people in the room. Amazing job. So I do commend our audience if they have a chance. Attend one of Jason's events because there's going to be many. Just a little bit of a teaser there. All right, we're going to start with our first article. This one came from Dawn. So the White House releases new AI national frameworks. Want to talk about this?
Sure. I picked this because, we're seeing these open letters from people in industry, in the tech industry, saying, hey, we need to slow this technology down and start regulating it. And yet there's these frameworks popping out that most people probably don't even know exist. And these are a couple of the latest. But before we get to the ones they just released, and there were three, literally, I want to just note that this really builds on earlier efforts. So earlier this year, the White House put, actually NIST, Dave works with NIST quite frequently, put out an AI risk management framework earlier this year. It's a voluntary framework, no penalties or rewards associated with adopting it. But it talks all about risk mitigation for AI in four areas: governance, mapping, measuring, and managing. And so that's already been out there. Even at the end of last year, and the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy put out an AI Bill of Rights, which is really interesting, with 5 guiding principles that technologists should consider when developing AI tech: creating safe and effective systems, data privacy, something that's near and dear to all of our hearts, algorithm discrimination protections, user notices, and human alternatives. So the latest 3 that just popped out, well, let's see. We've got a national strategic R&D plan that focuses on AI. That's number 1. Focusing on developing safe by design AI systems with better human AI interactions, lots of different pillars. I'm not going to go through all of them because I want to give everybody else time to talk. The second thing was the Department of Education released an analysis that illustrated the potential benefits and risks of AI tech in education. We've heard a lot about this lately, kids cheating, using Chat GPT for their exams and whatnot. Really what this is focusing on is, hey, there's a lot of great uses in education for AI, like monitoring those exams, ironically, helping with writing, voice recognition devices, and things like this. But the warning was, hey, let's make sure there's human agency involved. Let's make sure we're not firing or displacing teachers with AI. And let's, of course, make sure we're guarding against data exposure and bias. And then the last thing was the White House has issued a public request for input on a forthcoming national AI strategy, this comprehensive approach. And you can find that, I believe, on whitehouse.gov. They're accepting comments through July 11th on that policy. And so Again, lots going on in this area. And I know, Mike, you picked the next article talking about a little visit to the White House from the ChatGPT creator. So we'll talk about that momentarily. But lots of things going on here from a framework and at least kind of the kind of high level policy level when we're talking about artificial intelligence, at least in the U.S.
Yeah, I'll save my comments until we get into my article, because it really is, these are a nice kind of pair for positives and I think negatives, right? So Dave, what are your thoughts?
Artificial intelligence is one of those things that really can explode our industry, both positively and negatively. I think there's no question on the amount of data or that is available in our industry. And personally, I do have a concern on the ethics and essentially how that information is going to be handled. Artificial intelligence takes that human factor out of the equation, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what that develops over time. I'm happy to see that there's Bill of Rights and policies in place because we need things that are going to govern us properly.
Yeah, I just want to touch on the Bill of Rights, because there was also another thing that was brought up in one of those linked articles that you had mentioned, Don. So about the previous kind of framework work that had been done. One of the things that they're trying to do is eliminate systems being deployed where traditional biases of the training set. Let's say you got a history of employment data and factors like what's on a resume, and you feed that into an algorithm to get you the best candidate, that might unintentionally not include people of minorities, because historically they were not put in positions where they were able to take the job and excel. So that's one of the factors that they are focusing on, and I think that's an important factor for sure. So Jason, what are your thoughts?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I think just to echo on what Dave was saying as well, absolutely the AI takes the human factor out of the things as well. But I think also, again, with what Dawn mentioned with the education side of things, it's AI needs to work together with the human aspects that we have as well, because I still think personally, face-to-face learning is absolutely vital for a child's education as well. But then if AI can also help maybe take on those tasks that would allow a greater degree of accuracy. I'm by no means an educational expert as well, but I do think that having them both working hand in hand with maybe still having that human element, I think is really key as well. Granted, coming across from the pond, the UK, I don't have too much from the idea of the US point of view, but I think it's really interesting, Dawn. I think it's a really interesting article that is going to have widespread effects both now and in the future as well. So yeah, keep the human element definitely from an AI perspective.
Yeah, that's also interesting in terms of when do you give things over to the AI? Because a lot of the issues that we're seeing around it are less of the kind of catastrophic apocalyptic ones and more of the just we trust it to do something and it actually doesn't do that, or it produces results that are more likely to be false than true, so you can't use it in a system where you need deterministic results, and that leads to a lot of larger concerns like jobs. Are we going to fire people too quick when you actually haven't found a replacement for them? And I think what's good about this framework is it does shine some light on that. Although I'd like to see, I think, more language about how and when you replace people. And then also, I think societally, we have to consider that it's possible that companies want to replace people too fast.
Yeah.
And that causes damage to the economy in its own right.
I didn't mention these R&D pillars, but I think I want to, because I think they're really excellent, and they definitely dovetail into things, Mike, we've discussed on previous shows. For example, developing shared public data sets for broad AI algorithmic training, right? So getting to that open source, transparency, what is going into this, whose information are we grabbing? Are we attributing that information to that author and giving them the credit, or that artist, as it were, right? These are all things that are critical, and that is one of these pillars in the R&D strategy. It talks about prioritizing long-term investments in responsible AI, however defined, developing, Jason, to your point, methods for enhanced human AI collaboration and understanding. I think it was Dave that mentioned the word ethics. So thoroughly compiling a definitive list of ethical, legal, and societal risks and benefits to AI system developments. Evaluating the needs of an AI savvy workforce. I mean, and expanding public-private partnerships, as well as establishing, Jason, to your point across the pond there, international collaborations on AI research efforts. So, the R&D AI strategy, I think, really fairly embraces so many of the issues that we've all been talking about forever, and that every single one of us raised. So I did want to circle back to that.
Well, that's really good that they're considering it and keeping it top of mind, because otherwise you're going to end up in a situation kind of like we're going to talk about now, where lawmakers are completely dependent on industry to give them answers about their own technology, which is we can all kind of understand where the incentives lie there to kind of push your own vested interest in how this technology should be deployed and regulated. So do you think that's a good enough segue,
I think it's a
Don?
great segue. I think we should transition to your article, Mike, because this was a great one.
Yeah, so how Congress fell for Sam Altman's AI magic tricks. I would suggest anybody who has the time listen to at least the opening statements that Sam Altman, co-founder of OpenAI, made at the Senate hearing. Who I think those were held by Blumenthal. Because even in the opening statement, he talks about the corporate structure of his company being both a nonprofit foundation, which just happens to support his for-profit business. So there's some weirdness there, and as actually Elon Musk has brought up, ironically enough, not that he provided any good answers to making AI more open and available, but he talks about how this technology should be open and accessible. And less than like 4 or 5 sentences later, he talks about how it should be licensed to only people who could red team it and make sure that it's secure and safe and not going to harm anybody with bad ideas. So one of the things that I think is interesting is a lot of the people are talking about how they can censor these AIs and how that should be the point of constraint, rather than relying on traditional kind of law to carry us here with, well, if you deploy a technology that's used for a certain task and then it fails to do that, like creates bias that leads to minority populations being hired, or put somebody in danger because they read information they thought was factually correct, took an action, and that led to somebody's death or injury. I think we could kind of handle things there, rather than the idea of licensing a technology that is already so immensely distributed to the point where it's operating in my camera right here. It's probably on your phone. If you have a Google or Android phone, a lot of them have shipped with tensor processing units. And the idea that a student wouldn't be able to create a new computer vision algorithm for a drone because they wanted to integrate it with a large language model so that it could be more accessible to people who can't type or have vision issues and need to actually talk to these automated devices, because they would have to first buy a license or use through OpenAI because only they can do it safely, seems really, really duplicitous to me. And I found this too. So let's see if this article pops up. So at the same time, while he's calling for regulation to stamp down the industry here in the US so that only smart, intelligent players like himself can do, he's thinking about leaving the EU because he doesn't like the way that their regulations are falling out, especially around specifically privacy. So um, it's just, I've never seen such naked rent seeking in my life, and I'm curious what your comments are on this. Jason, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think it's yeah, it did make me laugh, sort of leaving the EU with the side of things with the privacy. But I think it's the AI. It's an interesting point you make about sort of the AI sort of getting rid of an employee, for do it or for a task that they've done wrong, and it's it sort of we very quickly focus on all the bad things that's happening with AI when actually AI is actually there for good and can do a lot of good things for a lot of multi sectors. So we've talked about education, technology, all kinds of things like that as well. So yeah, I didn't sort of have. I need to probably watch a little bit more of the one he did in the speech itself as well. But I just think AI is going to be transformative, as we know, both now and in the future as well. And it's going to be. I think it's just making sure that we're utilizing it for the very very best as well. I think some of your points you mentioned as well, Mike, to it is. So I'm just trying to sort of get my sort of head around sort of the AI stuff as well. I don't know if Dave or Dawn wanted to just sort of go in while I just get my train of thoughts. Apologies, Mike. I've just sort of gone around in a bit of a circle. Apologies.
No problem. Dave, what do you think?
I think everything kind of circles back to what we discussed in the previous thing. Giving someone too much control could potentially be dangerous. As you were giving your summary, I actually Googled too much power quote, and it's an interesting thing what first came up. The quote's by a gentleman by the name of Frank Herbert. It says, "Power tends to isolate those who hold too much of it. Eventually, they lose touch with reality." And I think that's kind of it sums up artificial intelligence. When you take the human factor out of it and you allow that algorithm to make a determination of what's right or wrong or just how to move forward, we've lost touch with reality. And I mean, I'm all for, expediting things. And as a private business owner, I would love to make more money by making jobs simpler and more effective. But the reality is that human factor, which has to do with answering the phone to shaking people's hands, becomes lost when you start bringing in artificial intelligence and whatnot. And personally, I don't really care how well you fake it, whether you're using a deep fake to mask someone's face or not. You're still losing out of that human factor, and we're losing touch of reality. And again, personally, it's pretty concerning to me.
You know what's interesting about that, Dave? Sorry, John, I gotta get this one in. But everybody thought that AI-generated content was going to take over everything a couple months ago. I have yet to see any consistent channel on YouTube that is AI-generated content, other than people telling me you could make AI-generated content using this tutorial. But then I'm still interacting with a human. So, Dom, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I mean, if I was going to kind of put a tagline on it, it would be "Don't believe the hype," right? Like, so we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, Mike. You had brought that article up, that gentleman that talked about how basically AI is just it's math. It's math right now, and people are humanizing it in a way that the technology hasn't really kind of achieved that level of sophistication yet. And that was, I think, what this article talked about. My brain went to a whole lot of places when I read this. First of all, whining and dining the congressman the night before the hearing. I was like, okay, that sounds really
when
ethical.
Does that happen?
I'm like, seriously?
Mark Zuckerberg did not get that welcoming, like red carpet like this guy did.
Yeah, so I guess the wine wasn't flowing. Maybe Meta didn't have a good enough party beforehand, but I was just like, okay, so they prime the pump, right? They get everybody excited. They do a little demo,
Mechanical Turk awesome, thing, right?
Yeah, like the incredible power of this technology, right? Which isn't really, there's not a lot there in some respects, and we've covered this before on the show. And then on the other hand, turns around and says, yeah, but this is so awesome and breathtaking that we do really really need regulations for this. And so the comments in this article were like, hey, this is just a marketing ploy. Like, this is getting them a lot of free press. Obviously, we're talking about it right now.
Yeah.
People across DC were talking about it. And I love the quote in this article from one of these, the Brown University's director for the Center
Oh
for
yeah,
Tech
another one you're talking about.
Responsibility. He says, quote, "We don't ask arsonists to be in charge of the fire department." So here, seriously.
Well, one of the interesting things, Don, is I mean, the incentives are so clear here because AI actually, these models are really strikingly simple. Like, it's all about the data set you put into them and then kind of managing that data set, right? So I think what's happening here is all of these AI companies are realizing there is no moat around their product. A perfect example is Meta's or Facebook's large language model. I think it was Llama, made it out onto the open internet, which allowed people to do testing the same way you would have built a IBM compatible back in the day, where you literally went circuit by circuit and then rebuilt the schematic that way. MIT students were able to do that and create Alpaca, which was a large language model that was pretty close to what Llama was. So that means you could backwards engineer these AIs with AIs. So how do you actually constrict the product? Well, you could force the government to hand out licenses to only the good people, right? So I think there's an actual strategy to this, because the truth of the matter is what OpenAI originally stood for, and Elon wasn't the only person to leave, was the idea that everybody should have these, so that Google and Facebook weren't the only companies that had these AI technologies. And it was for the safety of the human race. It was literally a mission statement that high-minded. But the truth of the matter is, what OpenAI is doing now is nowhere near that at all, and that they're actually trying to make the technology more closed than it already is. But
And
it should be
Microsoft bought
available
them,
to
Mike,
everybody.
right? Like, so they're not like the little
Yeah,
guy
they're
anymore.
the majority owner now. Yeah, so it's definitely a change in tone. Any final comments, Jason? Do you want to kind of circle back after hearing what we said?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think just to echo on what Dave said as well, is that human, again, bringing into that human factor as well, shaking hands and that face-to-face contact as well. I know many times if you're trying to get in touch with a company to speak to someone, there's nothing quite like actually speaking to a physical person on the phone. And yes, as we go back to the previous article, that AI does take out a load of those sort of other bits that would do it very well, and then saves the human to then focus on another aspect of the business that they excel in as well. So yeah, I just wanted to just highlight that human factor is so important. I know I value it aside from work, but I know the benefits of it also from a work environment as well. So I'll certainly be watching that very more closely, Mike. Thank you for sharing.
Well, I was going to
Well,
say, Mike, clearly OpenAI agrees. Otherwise, they wouldn't be having face-to-face dinners and face-to-face hearings with Congress.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, look, everybody on this call, these are in-person connections, right? And we reestablish them by meeting in person, going to events, etc. And I mean, we're all pro-technology people. I mean, we live our lives around it. So I think, if anything, AI and the advancements we've seen, if we do take a lot of the drudge work and kind of, data management crap off of people's plates, I hope that's just a call to invest more in these person-to-person relationships. All right, we're going to take a quick break and thank our sponsors. We've got a new one, Aerovigilance. We're actually going to see Tom from them on the Full Tilt next Tuesday, so check that out. Also returning Rubric Law, Drone Up, and SAIC. So thank you for making this episode possible. All right, next article is Jason's, and this is kind of a hobby horse for me and Dawn. We've brought it up multiple times, so any progress to see on it is awesome. So tell us a little bit about this, Jason, and why it's important.
Thank you very much, Mike. Yeah, it's a passion very close to my heart as well. So this was a really interesting article that literally blew up our social media channels over the last month as well. So to put a bit of perspective as well, EASA, Europe's Civil Aviation Authority that's working on certification for eVTOL aircraft as well. Now, I think this is probably the third in a real key matter of steps. So they did a public survey back in May 2021 where they looked at urban air mobility survey, interviewed a whole host of people from Barcelona, Hamburg, Milan, Paris, Olesund, sort of in the Swedish and Danish border. And environmental noise was one of the top societal concerns for that. So as a result of that, EASA then published in July of last year about air taxi operations and how it will happen in Europe, in the continent. So then we fast forward May of last year, or sort of earlier this month, where they published this world's first proposal of assessment and limitation of air taxi noise. Now, this is really big. I think we're at the crucial stage now where we want to be showing people rather than telling them that this is going to happen. So the interesting point from this article, I find, and I would welcome any thoughts on this as well, is they're using the international standard for heavy helicopters, which a bit of a different sort of beast in comparison to the silent eVTOL aircraft as well. So I think this one's really important because it's showing that EASA, one of the key players when it comes to certifying these aircrafts, are taking the necessary steps. And I'm sure that there'll be a lot of harmonization from other civil aviation authorities. We know the excellent work that the FAA are doing over in the US. Also know that sort of the far east with Asia Pacific in terms of China, Japan as well. Just really one final thing very quickly I'd like to sort of say as well, and I'd urge all of your listeners, if they haven't already watched it, is on YouTube in August of last year, Joby Aviation, big US air companies we know, Joby and Bever is really motoring ahead with their certification of their aircraft. They did a video of how quiet is our eVTOL aircraft. And honestly, it's astounding. So they've got 2 airplanes, 3 helicopters, and then they've got their eVTOL aircraft. And I think it registered on the noise decibel scale 45.2 decibels, which, to put into perspective, is between refrigeration and sort of like moderate rainfall. So honestly, if you watch the video, you'll see a stark difference between the volumes. But I just think this is a really important one going back, Mike, is that it's the noise, and it's a big concern. A lot of people don't want those flying over their communities, but if they can see and hear how quiet it is, then I think that's going to do a lot of difference for it. So I will stop there because it's a topic I could talk about for hours on end, and I'm conscious of the time we have here.
Or maybe not here.
Exactly. I like what you said there.
Don, you want to take this one first?
Sure, absolutely. Noise is critical. I mean, I worked at the Air Force Academy and we had these little trainer airplanes that would fly around and people would come out virtually with their pitchforks, right? I mean, literally, they weren't louder than a lawnmower. And that's really the point I want to make here. First of all, this document, if you actually click on the link, it's 71 pages and 71 pages of mathematical formulas, basically. So my head exploded because I am not a mathematician, not a scientist. But what I noticed on page 20 was a little table of allowable levels. And I'll give you one example. They said, 85 decibels at takeoff. Well, know that a gas-powered lawnmower is literally 95 decibels. So they're saying you will be quieter than a lawnmower. Yeah. And, because the article that I read separately talked about how anything over 85 decibels can cause irreparable harm to hearing, but that's only with extended and repeated exposure. When you think about the takeoff, the landings, they're very momentary and fleeting. So I don't think there's really going to be a concern about that. But, it's really more than that. Mike, I think you said, we've talked about this before. And I'm going to go back to last August. UC Berkeley in California, Department of Transportation had a great conference out there at San Francisco Airport. And there's a company called ARUP, ARUP. They really focus on this acoustic problem with eVTOLs and gave a really excellent briefing. The guy's name is Ryan Bizarek, so check him out. Lots of research they're doing on this. And basically, there's kind of the objective standard, which is this math and these decibels and the actual sound. But then there's a subjective, if you will, component to this of, how people perceive noise. And so the example he gave, and I love this example because it's really common sense. It's think about a bumblebee, how small that thing is, but if it flies near your ear, right? Like to you, that noise right there, that's going to just set you off, right? Even if it's a tiny little insect that is flying, in your proximity, not putting off a whole bunch of decibels, just because you're affiliating that noise with this, maybe you can get stung or fear or whatever it is. I think with eVTOLs, we just need to do a better job, Jason, I think as an industry of, like you said, getting that word out, like the show and tell, the meet and greet, like let people see them, let them touch these aircraft, let them see one take off, let them feel it, right? Like because otherwise it's just going to be honestly visual clutter in their skyway out there off their back porch. Like, oh, here goes another one. Oh, that's so loud, when it's really, really not. I had the privilege of seeing Archer's first transitional flight of the Maker, which is their prototype aircraft, and the same. The next day they unveiled the Midnight, which was their production aircraft, and they're moving forward. And I'll tell you, I was there and it was super cool. I mean, we couldn't even like hear it. I mean, we were obviously, there was a standoff distance, right? And there were dudes in a trailer because the Maker is fully autonomous. It's remotely piloted. Okay. So there were guys in a trailer that were controlling it. But yeah, it was just like, what? Like it was unbelievable. And I think once people actually see them and hear them for themselves, it will matter. And I think we need to get out there a little bit more on that.
Completely agree. If I could just really quickly just jump in as well. I think one of from Joby's video, I think the really interesting comment is a load of them were like, my word, I did not know aircraft could be that quiet. I was very skeptical of air taxis to start with, but this video has proved to me that there is maybe a chance we can have aircraft that will hover above us and we won't stare up at the sky and wonder what on earth is flying past us. So yeah, completely echo with your points, and Dawn. And we are getting to that stage where more flight tests. Paris Olympics is next year, and I know that the air show this year is doing a lot of focus on advanced air mobility. So again, more people to up close and personal, touch the aircraft, feel it, and talk to the experts about any concerns they have as well. Because the more feedback they can get, it's always going to help as well. So it's an exciting time.
What are your thoughts, Dave?
I'm actually really excited about this because when you start thinking about the market, and even if you compare it to drones is a stepping stone to actually moving people transport. And some of the problems that we have in the industry as far as package delivery and whatnot is, how much is someone going to really care moving $1.50 cup of coffee? But when we start actually transporting people, now it's exciting because we all value our time, and getting from point A to point B in a more convenient way is kind of why helicopters started to take off in to begin with. So in particular, when you start dealing with doing things in a more silent way or something that's not going to interfere privacy or any concerns where someone's going to, listen and say, hey, what's that? So-and-so's heading to work again. I think when we reach that point, we're going to get closer to the Jetsons. And as a matter of fact, I think there was an announcement way back when about one of the old personal vehicles, Jetson's one of the companies. And it's ironic because I think that's what we grew up watching on television. And we're not exactly there yet, but someday maybe we will. And sound has a lot to do with it. Many people know that I recently moved into a new building. For years, we were at an airport. So I'm used to the sounds of, that could be distracting to everybody. And as much as I love aviation, and I think the engineers in our industry are geniuses, now you have the ability of leveraging them and all that they know to make these aircraft quieter and more efficient. Unfortunately, in the drone industry, the money's not there to hire that, tens and 20s and 30s of those engineers. But in the VTOL market, when we're dealing with larger aircraft, it definitely is. And I'm really excited to see what's around the corner.
It's really funny when you mentioned the Jetsons. I was thinking of the actual sound of the Jetson cars and how on a Tesla they actually added engine noise, right, Don?
Yeah, because it was too quiet and people would be crossing the street and not know a car was coming.
Right. So I hope that my future air taxis have the Jetson noise as the standard to let me know when they're coming or getting close. Yeah, I mean, but that's kind of the other side of it, right? Like, you might actually want to know when these things are coming. So, but it's good. It's good to see EASA taking a scientific approach. And I found it comforting to see that they were not just benchmarking against helicopters, but intelligently saying we know during certain parts of the flight that there might be more noise or different types of noise registered, so that we're going to take that into account into how we actually process the information. So it looks like they're doing a full top to bottom assessment, and that can't be bad, right? It's a good starting point, especially for, I think, an issue that is so important for acceptance of this technology. Because I know just historically in New York, when they were trying to bust helicopters in and out of Wall Street, people started getting angry. And not just, people saying, oh, these rich people going to Wall Street. It was the other people on Wall Street that were complaining about the noise.
I would love to ask Jason. Jason, you said, Twitter was blowing up about this, and I know you've got a huge pro eVTOL crowd. How was this received in the community? Was there criticism that they're using a heavy helicopter standard, or like what are some of the themes that jumped out at you that you're hearing in your circles?
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. And I think, yeah, absolutely. Heavy helicopters, I think, was one particular one, because it's a bit of a different, as I said in the answer, it's a bit of a different comparison, because essentially there's that question, isn't it? Are we going to effectively, are eVTOL aircraft effectively going to replace helicopters? And I think that's always a really difficult question, because I think eVTOL aircraft are, for the first instance, will be, as Dave said, that point A to point B. They won't be going, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles. That would be the regional aircraft, the sort of like the hybrid, so to speak, as well. So I think really the themes that I came out from the story when we published it was a lot of sort of clapping of the hands and thinking, yes, EASA's taken that step on to address the noise issue. They've taken the learnings they've had from the other people that have made from that survey. Also, as Mike said as well, when it regards to that assessment as well, I think it's also really key too, is it's just, hopefully though, this consultant is 2 weeks away as well. So I think it's a public consultation, so the last comments are in sort of, I think, the end of June 2023 as well. So it might be that later this year, maybe fall, we'll have a bit of an idea of where that comes from as well. But I think overriding, Dawn, it's very much positive. A lot of people really see this as that sort of next step in that process of getting that noise assessment as well. Of course, there's going to be some people that are a bit skeptical about it and still believe it's not going to happen. But I think if you've got a key player like EASA, they're taking that leading stance on it, then that can only be a good thing as well. So that's not to say also that the FAA and the others aren't doing a lot of stuff as well, because I know you've also talked about this in the past, about that blueprint that they've recently done as well. So a lot of people are working towards it, and it's great to see from our perspective as well.
Yeah, well, Jason, we've got a ConUps. You guys have use-based regulation, right? I mean, EASA's putting out noise standards. If I was a manufacturer, at least I'd be like, all right, now I know what I'm building to. When you don't have that and everything is like, well, we'll take a piece of this and maybe a piece of that, and we'll figure it out as we go. I mean, that's not really a great place to be if you're a manufacturer trying to get investors in your technology. Plus, let's not even talk about the regulations further here. Yeah. I mean, so no, I love,
especially if a regulation can stop your business in its tracks.
Yeah,
right,
that's right. So I love that EASA is leading the way. So good on them.
No, thank you. And I think just really finally, really quickly, it's that, as you said, Dawn, very quickly, it's that set point. So we're going to have new companies. It's worth mentioning. There's going to be other companies, other eVTOL startups that maybe not even started yet, and think, right, so we've got this aircraft, we've got X amount that we need to certify to build and develop it. what's the regulations? What's the regulations for sound? What's the regulations for certification? All those bits. So it's that little step-by-step progress. So they have a bit of a jigsaw. They can put all the pieces together. So, and we want it to start now so that the first early stages of that commercialization, we've not got to that stage of thinking, oh, should we have thought about that or should we have thought about this? So very promising.
All right, so we're going to talk about our other favorite issue, because as Don has said many times in the past, you can't have a drone industry if you don't have counter drone technology to make sure the skies are safe. So Dave, do you want to talk about this article from Jonathan?
Yeah, so Jonathan, as always, took the time to put all his thoughts down, and it's really an incredible read to take the time and look at it. Long and short of it, what Jonathan did is he broke down, just essentially the laws, regulations, and whatnot, and the concerns that are facing the industry as a whole. You have the positive and the negative side of drones, much like you have different user groups, the military versus civilians, and it touches upon even what EASA is doing in trying to define standards and saying this is how certain things are going. It's the same thing in not just the drone industry, but the counter drone industry as well. You have your detectors and your defenders, as Jonathan broke it down, the normal stuff like that. But really what starts getting interesting is when we take a look at the regulations, the laws, and everything else that is around that. And interestingly, Dawn actually was in my office this past week, and our side conversation was about counter UAS and some of the laws and whatnot. What was most interesting to me is kind of the conversation that I had with Casey over at Aerial Vigilance. It was, if you push that button, you take over that aircraft, you own it. Well, Jonathan went one step farther, and he quoted 107.19, which essentially says that if you took it over, you own it, and you need a 107. And those are the things that I think the industry is not aware of. And I love the manufacturers that are bringing things to the table. We need it. But we also need to share that knowledge and education, and that's what this article is all about.
Yeah. If you own it and you're required a Part 107, does that therefore mean you can't use an automated system to take it down and pilot it?
It's an interesting question.
Who's the pilot then?
Or do you need a waiver maybe? I mean, because like right now, right, you just can't have a fully autonomous system under Part 107. You still need a pilot in charge, right? So like, he raises a lot of weird things here. Yeah.
But even under that consideration, an autonomous system is still monitored, right? So like, so fully autonomous, it's still, there's going to be somebody with whatever certification that would be required for BVLOS or etc. Somebody's still monitoring it, and what license do they need, right? So this opens that up to be considered. Where honestly, credit to Jonathan, because it's something I thought of all this stuff. I've heard every conversation you could possibly have about it, but he did find a unique take on it, especially on that front.
It's really a fascinating read because there's legal issues that start coming up, which is some old laws that were written decades ago that come into play, which Dawn and I had talked about. But then you start thinking about, again, the Part 107 regulations. And even if you think about beyond visual line of sight operations and being able to fly that aircraft and take control, you do need to explain your safety case, understand how you're mitigating your risk, and you need to go file that paperwork with the FAA. Now, in this case, what does it mean? So I'm really curious to see how this goes. And in many ways, I think perhaps it may have to some things may have to be legally challenged. But yeah, it was an awesome article. It was long, but it was filled with an incredible amount of useful information, and I enjoyed reading it.
Well, Jason, maybe you could provide some perspective, more international perspective on how counter drone technologies are perceived and how they're regulated. Any thoughts there?
No, thanks, Mike. I think just to echo on what Dave said, I think I'm halfway through sort of reading all of Jonathan's words, but I think it's really given me a bit of an opportunity to kind of dive into a bit more of the counter UAS, because we at eVTOL Insights, we talk a lot about drone delivery, the logistics, the drones for good, so to speak. So it's interesting to sort of have that other perspective from it as well. I think it's great to see that there's a lot of work that's being done from the counter UAS as well, because again, there's a lot of I know in Europe there's a lot of, obviously with the Russia, without going into the Russia-Ukraine war, there's a lot of, I think there was a drone that got shot down sort of near the Kremlin that was allegedly an assassination attempt on Putin, but it's getting more and more prominence in the sort of the news as well. And I think Jonathan's article, in a way, as Dave said, really gives me a bit of an idea of kind of what's missing from the piece as well. So in terms of the regulations, yeah, I think it's don't know too much from a UK sort of idea as to what it is with the US, but I think it's counter US is something that's really big and really important as well. And I think, as I said, Jonathan's article really opened up my eyes about how the different aspects there are as well. So yeah, as I said, I know I'm jumping around the pages a little bit as well, but I thought it was a really interesting read as well, and it's something that I'm going to sort of totally take forward from my side as well, because there's a lot of really good points there.
Absolutely, yep, Dave.
Well, no, if I may jump in real quick, Jason, because it's if I remember, it was Heathrow Airport that got shut down years ago, and I know even the FAA has issued stances on testing and validations in the United States. It's interesting how the different areas across the pond respond to not only drone use, but drone incursions. And yeah, it's an interesting side for sure.
Yeah, so I want to bring up that Jonathan also brought up the Fourth Amendment, which is he's got firsthand experience in litigating Fourth Amendment cases in the drone industry. So Dawn, do you want to kind of dive into that aspect of what he wrote at all?
Sure. I agree with Dave. A lot going on in this. I don't even think it's an article. It's more like a treatise. And the one thing I would say is I know the FAA started their counter UAS aviation rulemaking committee last week in earnest in Washington, or actually this past week in Washington, D.C. I was there attending across the pond, if you will, there in DC, the a counter U.S. Congress event run by the International Association of Conferences, I believe. Great event, by the way, and very eye-opening as to what's going on. But I raise all of that because I hope they're reading what Jonathan has said. I think what we find time and time again is that he'll put something out there, maybe the right people aren't reading it, because whether you agree with him or not, like, he's raising good points. So like, if you disagree, then show why he's wrong. Like, so and what became apparent, really clear to me from the conference last week, and media was it was Chatham House rules, so I can't get into details of the conversations that were held over those 2 days. They were really spectacular, but a couple things jumped out at me, and and these are from my own comments, so I feel comfortable making them. Number one, like, who's in charge of counter UAS? Like, the FAA, literally their charter is safety. It is not the security of the national airspace. A couple years ago, in an authorization act, Congress had designated, or it was an authorization act. It was an appropriation bill where they set aside money for DHS, Department of Homeland Security, to create a counter UAS czar, if you will. That never actually came to pass, to my knowledge. If it did, I don't know where this person is or what they're doing, but no one's heard of them, and nobody has heard of anything they've done. So there's that. Right. The FBI, I'm not going to get into great details, but severely understaffed for what they're doing, and really hamstrung by policy. Let's talk about that before we get to the Fourth Amendment. So there's this interagency advisory, right, that was written several years ago that outlines all the list of horribles. Like if you do counter UAS technology, whether detecting or defending, depending on what it is you're doing, you may be violating the wiretap statute, the Communications Act. The list goes on and on. And I know in the UK, you guys have similar laws because we had Martin Broomhead from Defense Solutions on our Donna drones, and he went through some of that. I wrote an article about it. So this is not just limited to the United States, but I'm being specific about the US. So you have all these laws, right, that you could violate, and this article that, or this joint memo that was signed off by all the three-letter major agencies in the United States. But that was several years ago. It was before remote ID was finalized, before we required people to broadcast information about themselves, which, by the way, as of this September will be the case, you know. So what I said was, look, I'm not calling this the you torture memos. Okay. But you know what? You wrote a memo that interpreted international law that was dead wrong. So perhaps there needs to be a relook at that interagency memo, because guess what? That is policy. That is someone's opinion on what the law says. And you're right. Absolutely. It has not been tested in court. And I'll tell you who will test it. It's going to be Jonathan, because he's already teeing it up. He's already getting clients that have been cited for counter violations based on some counter UAS technology, and he's coming with guns loaded of like, okay. And so let's talk about the Fourth Amendment for a second, because first of all, the interagency memo is a defense counsel's biggest dream. It's like you've handed them everything they can say, like, well, okay, you might not like what I did, but guess what? The evidence you just collected by using that counter UAS system violated A, B, C, and D, and here's your memo that says it. So there's that. And then, when you think about Fourth Amendment, it just, again, it depends, the lawyer answer, on what these systems are doing. I literally heard a person, I'm not going to mention names, I'm not going to mention companies, but I literally heard a person say, we create a pattern of life on a US citizen with our technology. And I'm like, what the hell? Because number one, that's a military term, by the way, pattern of life. It's like you track.
It's a scary one too. If you're for a normal
terrorists for weeks
citizen
on end to know, like, when they're leaving the mosque or whatever, so you can light them up on the road where nobody's at, no little kids are playing. Okay. And you can do that with your system for a US citizen and track it back to their house and then track where they go after that. I'm just thinking, I don't like that. So I think, companies really need to be careful in what it is they're also saying, getting back to the AI thing, like what they're promising people, what words they're using. Words matter, and so I think there are problems. Number one, because there's nobody in charge. Nobody knows really what the bright lines are. There's a whole lot of laws that apply here. And even the handful of federal agencies that have this authority by policy have been stymied from executing it properly, and now are at the risk of losing it entirely. And oh, by the way, that airport R&D, Mike, you mentioned, or I don't know if it was you, Dave, that's sunsetting in September. So for 5 years, they've been testing out a handful of systems at certain airports, writing up a report. Guess what? They're asking for 5 more years. And I'm like, hey guys, guess what? 5 more years, you're killing our industry. It takes 5 more years to figure this out. Seriously? So again, this is not like giving the FAA a black eye. I think they're doing the best they can, but like everybody else, they're unfunded. This is another unfunded mandate, essentially.
It's like unfunded, and it's not part of their main mission either. It's completely
even the ARC,
in a different mindset, and
even the ARC, it's like, it's like, well, okay, they're over there nugging through this. Is it their lane, really? I mean, a piece of it is, but where's the rest of them, and who should be leading this?
Right. So they're the expert on the airspace, but like that has led them to be handed these tasks that are outside of their technical expertise sometimes, or regulatory authority, or concerns, especially in terms of defense, right? And then also, did the FAA ever have to think about, protecting the airspace around Giant Stadium from a drone with a bomb? And who has the authority to actually intercept that? Even if right now that technically no one. So you would break the law and take it down because that's what a reasonable person would do if they had the capability. But it's not accounted for now. What are you going to get on the phone and call up the feds to drive down to the stadium to intercept the drone? So yeah, I think the longer that this goes on, I think the case that they're keeping the skies safe by delaying, that just gets destroyed.
Yeah. I just want to make one more quick point too, because you just raised a great issue, Mike, which is the lack of authority for the state, local, tribal, territorial officers, right? Police officers, first responders. And, that's something that people are proposing in legislation now. And I think it's a real sticking point for a lot of people in Congress. Why? All right, just look around, right? You've got people saying the police are overly militarized as it is. Let's defund the police because there have been some incidents, right? There's always First Amendment concerns with the media. And are they going to use these technologies to take down the CNN drone because they don't want them to see what they're doing with the rioters or the protesters, or pick the term you want to call the people that are out there voicing their opinion, most likely under the First Amendment, right? So, so I think, what I said was, we need to stop saying state, local, tribal, territorial. Police need authority. We need to say this is a homeland security issue, because when you think about homeland security, who are the first boots on the ground? It is the state, local, tribal, territorial, but it might just, again, from an optics and advocacy standpoint, this is about homeland security. This isn't getting, sheriff, whoever, like the authority to take down drones. That's not the point. That's not the point.
Yeah. So and that I'm a little bit more against the use of automated technologies by police than probably you are. But how is this different than we have a counterterrorism division, right, within the New York Police Department? Why can't there be certain authorities that are granted to them for specifically the use of keeping people safe? This is not so that example you gave of them possibly using it to suppress speech is probably less likely than the use for it to be used in a harmful way. And also the risk to human life is zero. You're decreasing the risk to human life by deploying this technology. So it seems weird that those scales are tipped in opposite directions while Mayor Adams is, signing off robot dogs walking in Times Square.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If that's okay, why is this not okay? Right. Why would the if we were still talking about ground robots, why would you stop a police officer from mitigating an incident if there was a terrorist robot dog on the ground, right? Because of rules of the road or something. That's how absurd this kind of feels at some level.
Yeah, it's a good point, Dave.
I think Mike, you touched upon something pretty interesting there. So I would dare say the reason why the robot was used in New York is because he followed standards and actually knew how to properly actually use it and put it in harm's way. And right now we don't have standards. We don't have rules in place. We don't have a czar, as Dawn says, or at least one that's basically put the hammer down and say, this is how we do it. And until we do, it falls back on the FAA's common rule. They don't make a rule until it happens in blood, until it's governed by blood. And unfortunately, we can't do that.
That's an excellent way to finish, Dave. Thank you for bringing that up. And now I have something to look into a little bit more. All right, Dawn, what do we got coming up this week and next?
Wow, lots going on. So Wednesday, actually, I think Dave's going to be out there in Pennsylvania, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, with David Heath on the Dawn of Drones. So we've got the PA Drone Association and Arium, which is the nonprofit arm of that. Will be on the Dawn of Drones as our Volatus Above and Beyond series guest, Wednesday, 9 a.m. Mountain on AVSI channels. And then on Thursday, we've got Greg Fortier from SAIC on our Clubhouse. He's kicking off a month dedicated to critical infrastructure support, Dave. So that should be a great month, and he'll be on the Dawn of Drones next week. And then, as you mentioned earlier, Mike, we've got Tom Adams from Aerovigilance on the Full Tilt Leadership Podcast next Tuesday. His theme is going to be collaborative leadership. So looking forward to hearing what Tom has to say.
Yeah, as am I. I want to thank our sponsors, Aerovigilance, Rubric Law, SAIC, and Drone Up. I also want to thank Tony Reed for mouthing up in the chat. Tony Reed, keep these conversations going. Loving this. So thank you, Tony. And everybody who doesn't know who he is, go check him out on LinkedIn. He is an amazing person and does amazing work. I want to thank our guests, Dave and Jason, for bringing their articles and their great opinions. And I just want to thank the audience in general for supporting the show. Thank you all. We are out here.